Welcome, thinkers, to Season 5, Episode 5 of Thinking Critically, a D&D discussion. Not much news this week. The only thing left to say is I've officially begun DMing the Dungeons, Dice and Dudes actual play podcast that I was a player on for the last couple of years. And we've literally just finished Session 0, and we're about to dive in to Session 1 this coming Sunday, the 8th of October. So tune in to DDND Pod on all socials and Twitch and YouTube and that to watch me DM and put some of this practice I've learned from thinking critically into a live situation rather than it just all being me blabbering all day. So yeah, check me out DMing, and that's it. As usual, follow me on all socials, and a shout out to all my fantastic listeners. I love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in every episode. Otherwise, let's get on with the show. And today I'm rejoined by Mikey, who's been on a previous episode of Generations. Thank you ever so much for coming back on the show, Mikey. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, you're right, mate. Thank you for having me back. Yes, my name's Mike. I recently did the Generations podcast with my two brothers and my dad, and Danilo, obviously. And we were having a really cool chat after that. And so, well, what about influence? Kind of was a part of that other podcast that we did. And we thought we'd come back for another chinwag.
Yes, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back on the show. It's always a pleasure to have guests who want to come back. So that always helps. So
Yes.
Talking of, today's topic is influence. So what does that mean to you in the D&D and wider ttrpg framework?
It's a very good question, and I knew that you'd ask it. So I thought about the best way to answer. And I think, to me, influence is going to be described in it's things that we subconsciously or consciously cultivate and then kind of in turn comes out, right? So good and bad influence. Sometimes you pick it, sometimes you don't. So a subconscious influence would have been the playing with my family and my dad and my granddad and things like that. Again, subconscious good, but it was cultivated over time. And then there's the conscious. I think it's perhaps the stories that you read or the other forms of art medium that you take in. You know, lover of video games I am, and the Tolkien books and other stories and things like that. That's what I believe influence comes down to. Not just the things that you witness, but the things that you choose to cultivate. Because there are a lot of things that we experience day to day. But in specific terms of influence, I think that there's an extra step that goes there, and it's the stuff that you take on and do. What do you think? Do you think that that's kind of accurate for you?
Absolutely. And as is pretty much the case with every episode of the show, when I was thinking on the drive home from work today about what I would talk about, I was like, what influence do the player characters have on the world? Like such
of course, yeah.
a completely different vector. So maybe we'll loop back around to that later. But
why not?
The one thing I wanted to pick up on with what you said there is, and it's said all the time in kind of world building circles and writing circles, is that like rarely is anything ever new. You're always, as you said, subconsciously influenced by stuff, which is why when you're world building a D&D campaign, plagiarism is totally fine.
Right.
Because basically it's going to happen whether you like it or not, is what I've found. And
yes,
a couple of my most, God, that sounds arrogant, my most popular arcs that I've done, the ones that the players have responded to most favorably, were heavily inspired by video games and specific sci-fi kind of things, and pulled and picked figurehead elements from those bits and bobs and re-mushed them in a fantasy setting. So also for me, as you said, video games is a big thing for me too, and obviously D&D is closer to video games than it is a passive form of entertainment. So I think for me, I naturally am influenced more from that background, and also I don't read as much as I should. So
right. No, I like that you said that. Yes, and I'm also a musician too, and that's the old adage there that it's very hard to be completely truthfully original. The other music that you listen to inspires you, bands, artists, songs, etc. I think that translates perfectly into what we're talking about.
Hmm. So I don't really like talking about it because I don't really follow any of them, or I'm going to sound very holier than thou. But in terms of like there's a couple of big DMs at the moment. So one thought I had was obviously for newer DMs coming into the scene, you're going to look to quote unquote experts and pull bits from how they
Yeah.
perform.
Uh-huh.
Do you think you've been influenced by any of those figureheads, any of those big hitters, or both, I guess, as a DM and as a player? Or has, as we've discussed in the Generations episode, has that been a more familiar thing first and foremost?
It definitely is familiar. I can only think of one name, that is Matt Mercer, right?
Hmm.
He has appeared to transcend space and time and populate so many areas of
Hmm.
culture in terms of the games and stuff like that. So yes, in almost entirely. I like seeing what other people do, and I like when I catch it. I think I expressed in Generations that it's not something that really lights my fire. But that's not to say that it's not without that, because there are cool things that I will see. And just to spin on your question, it's not necessarily the figureheads or anything like that, but there are definitely like places on social media that I will find really cool inspiration for a character or a
Hmm.
setting or a story. So maybe you could argue that that's it, where I really get the inspiration from and the influence from other people. Like, oh, for your next idea, try it. I wish I was able to recall some names, but they have really cool ideas, and that influences me. And I got like a little book of notes in my
Hmm.
the back pocket of my brain where I go, oh, I want to do a game about that.
Yeah.
One thing that did influence me, the very last game that I played with my friends and family when I visited England back Christmas 2021, we played a game, and it was an offshoot. It was set in the same homebrew world that we've always
Yeah.
been, but a few hundred years in the future. And the real world kind of influenced me. I said it at the time of a mysterious illness,
I
a
was going to say that.
pandemic.
I was going to say when that date you mentioned, I was like, that's
Yes,
an interesting time to
yeah,
be
the
flying around
writings
the
on the
world.
wall, right? Yeah. I did. I put it there, and there were a lot of tensions politically, culturally. I included some challenges between human races and people of common tongue and like orcs.
Mm.
That tied in actually prior to the whole date thing. I definitely had orcs, as they weren't a player character, half orcs. They weren't really a thing. No one played them. It just kind of got wrote into our lore that it was more Tolkien-esque, right? The
Yeah.
orcs were kind of bad guys. But revisiting it, the orcs are trying to come into society, but there was like, oh, you're half orc, you're other like derogatory words. Like
Yeah.
I think things like that, right? And the people around the table were like, oh, this is it. Like, and there was kind of a part of them. We say that players' personalities go into characters that they
Yeah.
play, and for me as a DM, the things that go into my world are obviously what we're discussing, influence, and the real world was definitely an influence there. It was quite cool trying to apply a little bit of the real world things that were going on, because
Mm.
whenever you're playing a game, you're always kind of just taking a gamble that your players are going to invest, that they're going to buy in, right?
Mm.
Your job as the DM is to create that environment which people want to engage with. But a kind of an offshoot of the real world, it kind of just ran itself,
Mm.
short exposition. We started off, oh, you're on a cart, and you are out traveling looking for this artifact. Yeah. Rhubarb, classic thing. But when they got to the town, they had to go through a screening procedure. They had to be checked, right? They had to be checked that they weren't infected or contagious, and they had spent time in isolation in a prison. So, and all like the whole table just bought into it. They
Yeah.
they knew from the real world. Oh yeah, got to take your 5 days. Got to make sure that you're not like it was different. If I did that before
Mm.
the whole pandemic thing, it probably would have had a different flavor. I might not have known how to DM it in the same way. I might have been taking these guesses. Oh, this is what I think people would have done to, look after people's health and stuff like that. But I had a real world basis. So yes, definitely influenced by the real world there.
I absolutely agree. And that's absolutely a hardcore truth for the macro, like things like a worldwide pandemic, all the way down to the micro, like I burnt my toast this morning. And that will seep its way into like an NPC ruins their breakfast or something like
Right.
that. But I totally love how that's a relatively unique element of TTRPGs is that way to and the power that the DM has to fold in their real world for everybody and bigger and small things, even stupid things like birthdays and stuff. Like
Yeah.
Forgotten Realms, do birthdays exist in Forgotten Realms? Don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah.
But it's cool to
Well, they have years.
those.
I don't know. People do count the years.
So yeah, it's cool. The real world have that kind of immediate influence on the game. It's not as if because now we're getting films and TV shows that are typically adversely affected by the real world pandemic because no one was working or they couldn't shoot scenes properly and blah blah blah. And that's like a 4 or 5 year lag. Whereas for D&D and other TTRPGs, you're getting it. You're like living it, and it's influencing your game at the table that night, which is really cool. Like you don't get that weird kind of self-propagating cycle of like it's happening. I'm experiencing it again through like a different lens and processing it in that way to like it's now impacting my day-to-day life. And
right, definitely, yeah. No, it is when we sort of take in those external factors and rather than just regurgitate them, because the example I gave was pretty like bomb on the nose, right? But the influence and something that I'm trying to get at is that you mix it with your own ideas and thoughts, right? So you can have something that's basically, pandemic real world, pandemic tabletop,
Yes.
D&D. But then, like you said, the birthdays and stuff like that. And I think that when you have your own ideas, so the birthdays, like there was one where it was like instead of counting birthdays, we used to count like winters. Oh, it's his 5th winter. He's turning, we had a little barbarian clan that on the 16th winter you would go out and go on the hunt, things like that. And that was a mix of, I didn't really come up with that idea myself. That was the birthday idea, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But then like I was thinking of the films that I'd seen and the old books and the way that they described it and other artists' renditions and interpretations. I also came along something you're talking about people that are influenced in modern production and things like that. Before I was aware of things like the Critical Role and a lot of social media stuff, I had a very good friend of mine that we used to game at his house when we were 17, 18. A lot of us around the table, that was the games that, my brother was saying we started and he met his wife and things like that.
Yes.
I was the DM for a lot of it, and then we switched. And my friend, if he's watching, Kieran, this is about you. Hello, Kieran. I haven't seen him in a very long time. I hope he's doing well. The thing that I got from him, like he influenced me. So he set something completely on the head. I had the low fantasy, my own world thing. He did the own world thing, but he kind of set it with a bit more of a steampunky vibe. It was like steampunk meets Avatar Last Airbender.
Awesome.
It was very cool.
So like Legend of Korra almost, which is the sequel to Avatar when they've got trains and cars and all sorts.
I'm less familiar, but I think you're on the money there. And that was his thing, and he influenced me. What he would do actually is he got quite cinematic. I remember very vividly, and I enjoyed it a lot. There was a part where our village got invaded and attacked, and we were still young at the time. We were kind of all monks, right? That was kind of the premise of the story. And he created a cinematic moment where he used music off of his computer, his laptop, and he used other things like sound effects and creating a visual thing where it's like, you're running through here and just make a quick roll. Quick. And my dad said about, the quick speed gaming stuff. You kind of put all that together. There's no one direct influence in this scenario, but it all led into what I now do, because I take Kieran's idea of using the sound and the music. I use my dad's idea of the speed gaming stuff, and that then formulates my style. And I suppose what I'm circling around to is that there's no one, whatever X is, example A is made up of 2, 3, 4 different things a lot of the time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then combined with my taste and what I do, which is the low fantasy, really hardcore, couple hits, you're dead, like that tension. I like a lot of tension in what I play, and influence. I'm going along the idea of movies, and I really love small cast, very minimal horror movies. Think like The Thing and the first Alien movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's not much song and dance. There's a lot of just things doing and existing.
Have you seen Moon?
I'm afraid not.
It's my favorite film of all time. Duncan Jones, Sam Rockwell in space.
Okay.
Pretty much like 3 actors, and things just happen. So,
yeah. Okay. I've got a list. I've got some other things. Me and my friend, we've got a movie list, and that is going on mine. Thank you. But that comes into my storytelling. And as we were saying in the Generations podcast with my dad, sometimes we don't roll dice. Sometimes we just interact with one another on the opposite side of a table and kind of work this story out. And that happens with me. I like the tension, something building, and it's more so that the players create the story from what they are doing and what they decide and the way that they interact. For me, it's a story building platform. I could come up with an idea. I have lots of ideas, and that all sounds really good on paper. But my style, thanks to the influences that I've had over the years, doing very little and having these minimal sessions, we all used to know when it was going to happen, like the week before a big battle. We know, oh guys, it's the big one next week, right? But sometimes after that or whatever, there's just licking your wounds, tending to things. You know how it is, right? And all of the things that I'm talking about, that Alien and The Thing and my dad's playing, it all just comes into my style of playing. And some people will think that's slow, some people will think that's boring, but for the players that I work with and for me, it's awesome. So that's definitely a big influence. Those types of movies that I enjoy, and video games. We talked about video games. And my brother was very brilliantly explaining how those bring in a new generation and things like that. But video games with great stories are my thing. My favorite games of all time have great stories.
Well, I'm a video gamer at heart. I'm gonna put you on the spot now and ask what, you can't say that and then not tell me what they are. So
okay, number one is probably Metal Gear Solid. The first Metal Gear Solid is
you made a lot of my
iconic.
listeners very happy now. So yeah,
first Metal Gear Solid is fantastic. We're still on games, right?
Yeah.
I am on the spot. I really am. Oh, you bastard. I just want to say Metal Gear Solid 2.
Great one. That's probably my favorite, to be honest.
3, Metal Gear Solid 3 is also really good. I recently, Ghost of Tsushima. I picked that up. I quite enjoyed that. I haven't completed it, but I'm enjoying it. I like that the story's happening. I've also been a fan of games that have very little story. I'm a big Dark Souls fan and the Bloodborne stuff. Bloodborne might be the best for me. I mean, I love the original Dark Souls, and the stories that you pick up there, they're not rammed down your throat. And Artorias, things like that. You just find it out, and it's cool, and that comes off to me. But the flip side is like Metal Gear Solid. There's so much story. There's so
2 hours
much
of
story.
cutscenes.
Yeah, but I like that as well. I like how interesting things can get. Sometimes the best stories are simple, and other times they have got so many threads. I think it's execution. It's execution, right? Because you can have very complicated stories that are a bit pants.
I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. It is an art more than a science. I always say that in terms of running a game and DMing, and also being a player, but DMing, let's stick with that for now, and building out the platform for the story to happen on.
Yes. Yes.
is way more an art than it is a science, in that it does take a buttload of experience, and you need to learn from your mistakes and be like, "Oh, my players didn't do that, or didn't like that, or that didn't go,
100%.
how I imagined it would because of some weird thing that I hadn't accounted for, and this, that, and the other." And you start to build that instinct of how, when you should move a step forward, when you should step back, when you should push someone else out or pull someone else in, and so on and so on. And that, with that in mind, you can do any kind of stories influenced by any kind of medium, or of any complexity. Is once you start to build that personal instinct, you can do your linear towns being attacked, short 3-clue mystery, bish bash bosh, there's
Yeah.
the culprits, sort them out, versus a complete noir, wheels within wheels, machinations within machinations, the police chief's the enemy, but he's actually a double agent. You could do all of that, but it is really how it comes down to that moment by moment table play of, make me a roll, or yes, you do see that, or I'm improvising and I make up this new NPC and somehow fold it in.
Right.
Definitely. um I I just wanted to add a second. We're talking about birthdays and stuff, and I think me using that as an example was influenced by the real world, because recently, I'm saying, oh, does Forgotten Realms celebrate birthdays? Humans in the real world don't even celebrate birthdays the same way, because until recently, South Koreans had like 3 government ages, because they count your age in 3 separate ways depending on which kind
Oh,
of branch of the government you're working in. And they've
interesting.
recently got rid of one, because everyone was like, this is too many.
Right. I
It
didn't
was
know that.
something like they use the Western style of, you start at 0 and then your birthday is at 365 days later. They also
Mhm.
have one where you start at 1, which I know some places in Europe at least used to have as well. So the first birthday you experience, you're actually turning 2.
Mm.
A raised start at 1 kind of thing. And then they also have one where it's your number of Christmases or your number of New Year's as well. So I think they've
Gotcha.
gotten rid of one of those systems. So there you go. I think that's been knocking around at the back somewhere, and that's why I
No,
brought
that's
up
really
that
that's
example. So
great. I'd love to leapfrog off of that, where we exist in the world influences us.
massively.
Being in California and hearing how people talk and discuss, and a lot of the big stuff that's out there, a lot of it is American. Look, I mean, the Red Box, Gary Guy, yeah, it's American, right?
Yeah.
It's not a British game. It is an American game.
Yeah.
But that low fantasy thing that I'm describing, I have a lot of Celtic influence. I have a lot
Mm,
of Anglo, there's Scandinavian influence,
yeah.
things like that might be more prevalent for me than it is someone over here, right?
hmm hmm
But speaking of that, I got interested when I was world building. I developed different parts of the map, and I thought about different parts of Earth. And I thought,
hmm
oh, something near the equator's got to be warmer and hotter and have
Yeah.
these different approaches. And I thought, what would the dragons look like there? Would they be different? So I also thought of like Pirates of the Caribbean, right? I wanted my own Pirates of the Caribbean thing, which Glenn actually took on the DM for. So me and Glenn used to spend a lot of time just in our formative years, actually, rather than playing, just like sitting with books, chatting. Like
Yeah.
we'd be out in the back, with a beer and a cigarette, just like, oh, what'd you think of this idea? So yeah, that's a cool idea. Yeah, and we're writing things down. That was as much joy to me as
hmm
actually playing. Just
Yeah.
like it's like the brain muscles working, right? So we come up with cool ideas. That's an influence. We influence each other. He influenced me. One of the parts of my world, we didn't officially implement it, but I kind of, without, I don't know, no spoilers, but Glenn's also a bit of a writer as well. If you ever have another conversation with him, he's a writer, and his world that he created in his high fantasy stuff, I kind of wanted that on a part of my map too. And eventually it was all going to become very meta and like, oh, his world and my world, canonically, whatever. But we were younger at the time, and that happened. And back to the Pirates of the Caribbean thing, it was actually one of the times where he came a DM and I became a player, and my
hmm
influence from other mediums, like I had to step back because I was a DM first, and then I had to let him be a DM. As a player, I tried not to be irritating, because I definitely get quite into my character as well,
mm
and he was the Jack Sparrow meets one of the Three Musketeers, young,
Yeah.
you know,
D'Artagnan.
Yeah, he was Jack D'Artagnan Sparrow thing. And I just went off. I completely embellished him. But that came from seeing all these other characters that I thought were quite entertaining on the screen, if you like, or on a book.
Mm-hmm.
Like the other people's depictions of them influenced my disposition, right? So whether I liked it or not on the show or TV, whatever. And then I wanted to do something like that. The influence on my characters, obviously familial, as we explained in Generations, the way that, you know, I would play with my family, but I also play with my friends, and definitely like having something anchoring my character down. And that comes from the storytelling. My favorite characters are the ones that we get to play those big stories.
Yeah.
I can't explain it any other way, right? I'd like to throw in a big character and like just go and do things, but it doesn't satiate me in the slightest. I have to have something that I can build just as a DM. Maybe that influences my play. Maybe it's a bit of the real world, bit of the medium, bit of the movies, the books, and it's also my DM style. My DM style influences my playing because I know the mechanics.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Do you ever feel like that? Because you flick between the two, right? Do you feel like because you know what it's like to be the other, it changes you? Or do you have like two different hats that you just put on and off?
No, it is one big hat.
Big
full
hat.
to the brim.
Yeah.
To match my big head. I did have a fear at one point that I would become, it would ruin it for me, having that kind of intimate knowledge of behind the screen. But the most important thing is that everyone's having fun, and in fact it actually increases that because I have that intuition of I know what the DM is trying to do here.
Yeah.
Like I know they're suggesting a thing, or he really wants X to happen, or
yes,
I know he's making us roll, but it's not really important. So I'm not gonna like, but what's behind the door? What's behind the door? What's behind the door? When I know, because I kind of know nothing's behind there, so I'm not going to labor it too much because I know it's just going to waste time at the table, kind of thing. It's just that intuition again of like, I kind of see what he's going for, so I'm going to lean into it and either help or not. If we're kind of point is for us to be stuck and lost, then I'll be like, oh, I'll try this other thing. I'll try this other thing.
Right.
If the point is to like, the DM's like, oh god, panicking because stuff's taking too long, then I'll be a bit more proactive in like, here's the solution. Let's let's go ahead, and that just brings the table. God, this is the arrogance episode, but it just. I found that having that lunch hasn't really taken anything away from me. I never feel like shortchanged of like, well,
right, okay,
I know what's happening next, but it feels nice to be able to help, basically, because I've sat in that chair and been in that position several times myself, desperate for help. So I know that it's necessary.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I quite like the way that you said that, actually. It's really, really good because after you said it, like all the lights went on in my circuit board. And not only do I do it, although I can be a bit of a pain as a player because, depending on the character. But yes, I also see around it. My granddad did that. Sometimes us young bloods would be fussing over all of the stuff. And my granddad would be sitting there, pipe in hand. He had a pipe, like just sitting there with a beer and a pipe. And he'd be watching us all. We're trying to do this thing. And he's like, the old was like, suppose I'll help, And he says, why don't we do this? And we all go, oh, yeah. He had like that sixth sense, but no, it was because he was brilliant at what he did on both sides of the screen. And knew when to sit back, knew when to step. Yeah, no, you said that in such a way that it's exactly how I remember experiencing it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is. And when I do the same thing, obviously still learning, not perfect, but yes, sometimes I do like my characters, my players to flail about in madness and go,
yeah, of course. It's still escapism at the end of the day. It's still serving a purpose, so yeah. The other thing I wanted to jump on, you said that you and Glenn would sit outside and just bounce ideas off of each other. My DM confidant, a guy called Jamie, he's been a guest on the show several times way back in season 1. And we'd spend like an hour or so on the phone just being like, here's what I've got planned, maybe coming up in my campaign. Let me just run it by you. How does that sound? Oh, that'd be really cool if this happened. Or, oh, you're going to do that? Have you thought about this? Oh shit, yeah, no, I didn't think about that. Let me try and work out. And I was grinning like an idiot for those watching the video version because I was thinking that's precisely what me and Jamie do, and that is a huge influence. Not even just on the world imposing its activities on me. It's your mate going, have you thought about this?
Yeah, definitely. You couldn't agree more. And like you say, it's a sum of its parts, right? You have all these things, and as I said at the beginning, sometimes it's a conscious influence, and other times it's an subconscious influence.
Yes.
And like you say, you don't really know, maybe until someone points something out or whatever. And, what about the direction that you steer your games? That's influenced by the feeling around the table, the reception, right? Sometimes, as you said, it's an art rather than a science, right? Kind of guiding it along. That's a perfect expression, by the way. I love that. And you then take that the next step forward, and it's not only what you do game to game, but it's kind of like what you think that you might want later on, and how much do you balance that with what you want and what the players want and stuff like that. And I think the immediate reaction and how people talk about it, does it influence you at the table? Does it influence later conversations? Do people bring it up? You mentioned something about DM and going mistakes and how that influenced you, and to become this craftsman, this mason of sorts. I remember doing something that fell flat. In my brain, it was such a cool idea.
Yep.
Such a cool idea. But it didn't necessarily work. And I learned from that. And it wasn't just one session. It was kind of across about 2 or 3 sessions. So I had to learn to live with my mistake over about 3 kind of tougher sessions. And the conversations we had afterwards were great. But the analogy that we came to, the metaphor, it's like cooking a dish, and you have all the spices in the spice rack and all the ingredients and whatever. If you dump them all in, sometimes they don't work with one another. It's about using the right ones, right?
Yeah.
And when you're talking about like stepping away, coming forward, how much do you push? How much do you take back? What do you include in that session? I did everything. I threw the whole spice rack in the the thing. I added like a dragon that was also a human that had shapeshifted, and it was her realm, and she was trapped there, and there was like this kind of mist gas that made people kind of go crazy, and they had to fight each other, and then they were going through like physics bending. It was too much. For me, I thought it was cool when I thought of the idea. The execution, though, right? It's the execution, and some of it was cool. Like I took a couple ideas out of it, but it didn't go the way I wanted to. And that also influenced me because it was a negative, rather than a positive. Is there an experience like that? Not only was it bad, but it was the biggest experience for me, one of the biggest experiences for me. And like, do you have any similar stories, like any moments where you're like, oh, I know that I'm going to learn from this?
Yeah. So in the first iteration, and in fact, I had more of an excuse in the second iteration of the story, but in the first time I did it, I wanted there's a sequelitis video in Mega Man X, and at the first you fight the boss, but it's like a fake fight because you can't win, and he kicks your ass. But that sets up the premise for the rest of the game, in that you build your Mega Man, you get upgrades, blah, 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 and then you fight the same boss at the end, and you kick his ass because you worked hard and got upgrades and practiced, and you've come back. And I was like, oh, that'd be good to have that. I want that feeling of like insignificance at the start, so that then at the end of the campaign they're like, we've come back and we've come to. So I pretty much had that on the winnable encounter. And the first time I run it, it was with initiative. It was with a different group of players, several games past. And was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to steamroll them, and then that'll be fine. And they'll be like, oh, we're going to want revenge and this, that, and the other. But it's a classic faux pas now of DMs is don't have unwinnable things or don't roll for things that they can't win because it's not fun. And I know it isn't because I've done it. And midway through that fight, I was like, yeah, they're not. They're just getting frustrated. There's not that spark of revenge. It is just which this is just like wasting our time. So the second time I ran it, I had planned for him, the big bad guy, to turn up, be like, I don't even want to waste my time on you. Here are a few of my minions, and then disappear completely. So still has a display of power, still an interesting combat that they could win, well, are likely to win. It just timed up perfectly with one of the players having to leave the campaign. So before jumping out, he fingered of deathed him and then disappeared through the portal. I was like, 2 birds with one stone. So that worked really well that time. Because they were like, oh, he's dead next to us now.
Right.
And the bad guys just disappeared. So now we're super pissed.
Yes. I can definitely believe that, and one of the worst feelings as a DM is the unhealthy frustration. There's frustrations with like problem solving and trying to work things out. There's like a healthy frustration, you know, that you can foster, and they're like, oh man, I got to get this, whatever that might be. And then there's the just throw your pencil. You know, when people are kind of like leaned back in the chair, and there's different body language, and you know, that for me is very deflating as a DM. That means that I've failed, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's certainly what it felt like. And that's why it's such a sticking point 5 years, 6 years later, that I was thinking, I don't want to do that again.
The moment. But you're a healthy human being, and you didn't let it get you down, and it influenced you to be a better DM rather than keep you down. It did. Yeah. Oh, I like that.
Yes. That was a key core memory.
Yeah. Sorry, I unlocked it.
Yes.
Danilo just defluffs for the rest of the day.
That's it. Yeah. I'm down. I'm out.
I'm out. Yeah. No, I think everything that we've discussed is very, very important, and you know, the different mediums, the positive and the negative, you know, from your players around the table, familial, or from me very heavily, and so it's going to be a little bit funky and weird sort of tangent, but how does this podcast influence you out in your other gaming habits and conversations and stuff? Because we're talking all about the games and what we do, but we briefly spoke before the camera was rolling that you have an influence beyond the conversations and the direct consumption of the podcast. Do you have, again, could be short exposition, but do you have any moments that you think of when I say that? Like, are there influences for your friends and family? Have you influenced anyone to start playing D&D? Have you influenced anyone to start their own podcast?
So I've definitely helped people when they've thought about doing podcasts. We're going to go very meta now outside of D&D. I mean, I've got an episode on podcasts, so that ship sailed years ago. Because I was like, hey, here's all the learning I had to do, going from literally no knowledge or gear whatsoever to maybe some knowledge and some gear now in terms of audio editing and distribution and all that stuff. So I've got, funnily enough, I've just got like a template email that's like, here's the software I use, here's the damage it costs, here's, you know, why it's good, and here's how I make my show. So that's definitely helped a few people in my personal life outside of D&D. That I have a lot of, what's the best way to put them? Like silent listeners, I suppose. I know you're out there. I know you're listening to me and my voice right now. You, and I'm talking to you right now. And so I can only hope that group have told their friends and family and brought things into their games and whatnot that I'll never get to see. And that's just a quiet little piece I have with myself, that like, I know the numbers are the numbers of the listeners, and that's like, hey, I'm sure that they are getting value and it is impacting their games and having a good time, which is the most important thing. And as we said before the show, I've got a core group of more vocal listeners, and not only do they obviously have feedback and comments on the individual shows themselves. Hello, you lot. They also will comment on various bits and bobs, or like the players in my games who are like, oh, you mentioned that thing we did 3 years ago and 50 sessions ago, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm glad you remember it, and I'm glad we're kind of reliving it through the show almost. So there's this kind of weird one way, I guess, what's the word, not one way, it's like parasymmetrical kind of information flow with this podcast, where I'm being fed by my players and my listeners, but they're not really on the show. So
right, no, that's fair.
Yeah, is a very weird and unique place to be. I can only hope that it's helped other people, and obviously from a personal point of view, I've hit the bloody gold mine. Where else am I ever going to speak to like 150 DMs and players and steal all their information? Nowhere. This is on my time in the comfort of my own house. This is perfect. I get to steal all the information.
You've given it up now. We've sussed you out. That's what you were doing all along. That's what you wanted.
20 more Thinking Critically clones are going to spring up just to... Fine, I'll be flattered.
It'll be flat. Yeah, I love that. I think you have a very positive influence. You had a very positive influence from the Generations podcast. That was probably one of the very few times that all my siblings and my dad have been present at once that isn't outside of some weird family function or whatever. It had a very positive impact on me and just my well-being. I felt very good for doing it.
Oh, awesome.
Talking to someone like-minded like yourself, and seeing your conversation with my dad on the Ravenloft podcast, and the way that you were talking, and it's all been very good. And I watched back the podcast and I smiled uncontrollably when you were discussing your homunculus.
Oh yeah.
And I just, that brought a joy to me that I don't think I could really replicate somewhere else. Like it's like, yes, your homunculus. And you said about the bathroom, find your homunculus.
Oh yeah.
Like, whenever you make it, just Amazon it, whatever. Send it. I want it. Find your homunculus. It's the positive influence that these games have on us. That's the thing, right? We talk about what goes into the game. There's the influence that goes in, but then you have the playing. You get your friends around the table, your family, and it's the positive influence that comes out. The positive influence that it has on me after I finish a great game, like a really good game. You know the ones. There's one where you're all round the table, you got your snacks, you got your beer, you got your Jaffa cakes, everything like that, right? They're all gone at the end of it. You've all just been having a really good time, and maybe you've had a big fight, you've had a big BBG, the map is all drawn out, there's a whole bunch of whatever it is, and you're done, and you're all sat around at the end, and you let that, whoo, and you have that good feeling. That is one of the reasons why D&D is one of the best games ever, and the best experiences ever, because I can achieve that on stage as a musician, and when I play and I have a really, really good experience, and there's a great gig, or I'm playing with other musicians, right? I'm very fortunate in my job. I'm a music director at the School of Rock here in Vacaville, California, and plug, blah, blah, blah. But we just did a staff show rehearsal, and getting to play with all of the really good musicians that I work with. Oh man, that was cool. That feeling is the feeling when you have a great moment in D&D and you make friends and you have those stories that you come back to later. It's awesome. I'm a little bit, short of words, but it's really good. It's why you do it.
It is, yeah.
You don't know you do it until it happens, right? You're just playing D&D. And some people don't have that. They play D&D and they just muck about with their friends. But then they have that one game. And then it all changes. It all changes.
Yeah, so I've said this before on the show. There's been several times in my home game that I run from here that I've had a long day at work or something, and sometimes you just want to turn your brain off and put on some television and do nothing for the rest of the evening. And I'm like, oh god, I've kind of got a responsibility to 4 or 5 of my mates now to essentially perform, and I've been a bit like, I guess I'll play D&D tonight.
Right.
And then like 10 minutes in, we're laughing, we're joking, we've got the in jokes as we were discussing before. Wouldn't it be funny if, or then this happens. And with my home game, certainly there's a really good cadence now between like everyone's kind of getting in little jokes here and there, but it doesn't really disrupt anything, and everyone still kind of gets what we're trying to do and stuff. And that's we've kind of hit a really good sweet spot now with like, when you go off on goofy hypotheticals and I do this other crazy thing, and we're like, yeah, I know you're not being serious, but it's funny, and no one really cares. So after like 10 minutes of that, I'm having the time of my life, and then when we wrap up at like 11:30, I'm like, I'm actually really glad that we still played, which is nice. And to go from really dour, like, oh, it's a Tuesday and a hump day tomorrow and blah blah blah, and it's work, to then come out the other side and be like, I can't sleep now because that was a lot of fun. And I'm gonna, I need like 20 minutes to unwind now. Is awesome.
Yeah, mate, love that. Yeah, I'm really glad for those experiences. I'm really glad to say that I did that. I'm running through the wall in my head there. They're all going through.
Yeah.
I think of my first experience, and I think of it as a player, right? I think of great moments as a player. I mentioned that my characters have a lot of character in them, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where it comes from, being a DM and creating that story and that platform for people, because I know that, and I'm thinking one of my characters, I'm thinking Dark Sun.
Mm-hmm.
My character that I played was a merchant / wizard.
Right.
And his whole arc was that he was betrayed by his trading partner.
Mm-hmm.
And he got left out in the middle of the sand and clawed his way back up. And there are things that happen that, and I have a very good DM, Daryl, he's my dad's friend. He's like my uncle at this point. But he put the things in there that allowed my character and me to have these moments of like the redemption and I got my revenge, and he allowed me to use my backstory as this merchant to have an impact on the story and tell things. And it all came to the head. There was this giant, battle fight thing. Everything went up on the wall. And I'm remembering this so very fondly. And he's like, at the end, you're blown off by like a fireball or a blast.
Yeah.
And then you see walking towards you a silhouette, and it was the person who betrayed me. And I was like, this is a 2-3 year arc, and it's all there. And my God, it was brilliant. It was so good. That moment that you're saying, like, I'm so glad I did it. You take that big arc and that big story. It was fantastic. It was really, really good. It just made the whole thing, because I felt like I'd been listened to. That's just a human thing. We like it when that happens, right? We want to be paid attention. We want people to do that. And he did that, and he created a moment for me. Very rare you get moments in life. Oh, this is your time to shine.
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons does that for people. And coming back, I'm getting a little emotional. But and it's not just because of what we did, but it's also who I play with, and they're really good friends of me, and I'm obviously far away, yada yada. But all of it is like, I want other people to do that, have that moment. Riding a dragon, getting revenge, whatever it is. It's like, as I said, I didn't make that story for you. You contributed to it, and I just kind of put it back. And you have that. It's so good on both sides of the screen. It really is. And that's it. That's why. Yeah, that's why it's so good. That's why this game is so good.
I'd love to end the show there, but we've got 5 more minutes to fill. So
your turn.
How about
your turn?
How about that airplane food? Well, riffing off the back of that and kind of continuing on with what I was saying earlier on. Obviously, that was my home game where we play remote. A couple of times in the streamed game that I'm a player in, the Dungeons, Dice and Dudes that I'm about to be the DM of for a little bit. Obviously, because that's recording, it does inherently change the nature of what is happening at the table. It's inevitable. It's it's being pushed out to the public, so you're going to change. So with that in mind, we'll I think we literally we had the TPK, that was it, and I spoke to the DM about it, and considering we're only maybe 10 sessions from the end of the campaign, I think it's fair to say that there's an argument to say that maybe it's perhaps slightly anticlimactic, ever so slightly, just because we had 2 years of gaming and then we're all dead now. But I'm a slave to the story, so story comes first. We all die, then we all die,
Yeah,
and
we all die.
I was like,
That's fine.
that's for me. But anyway, what we were playing and we all died, and he was like, okay, well, we're going to end the session there, and thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the socials, use this discount code, rah rah rah, and then we hit stop on the stream, and then we're all like, you okay, dude? Because this seems to have affected you quite a lot. And it was, what I'm getting at is even once, the hard stop on the recording, it still affected us after the game. And we had about another half an hour just sitting around discussing, what's happened, what's going to happen, how's everyone feeling with what's just happened. That's all just behind the scenes, off camera, raw, like, should we process this genuinely for a second?
I'm in complete agreement. Those little discussions that you have and the things that when you have those moments, it and right back to it's all an influence. It's every influence is like a chain link, like link chain, right? It's not just the one. There's here, and then there's this little influence, and then this one, and then you build it up, and then you create that long stream that of all those links, that stream of influence, of consciousness, subconsciousness. It all culminates into your big hat. So that's the moral of the story. Wear a big hat.
Wear the biggest hat you can find, both literally and metaphorically, is my advice to... I want to see all my listeners pictures of you showing up to your next game with the biggest hat you can...
That's it. Now that's your thing.
I have to do like a Jamiroquai thing and always wear a hat now on on the show.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I would... We're going to have you back on the show. I know we talked again off record about how long is the episode going to run and stuff, and I do think there's still value in talking about how characters influence the campaign setting, because I think there's a lot of value in that discussion around how do the DMs kind of fold that stuff in without it impacting the world too much or having to retcon swathes of history, and so on and so on. However, absolutely that's deserving of its own section. Part two, I think it's settled.
Well, I'm more than happy to come and discuss a burning passion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's probably it from me. I think we've discussed a lot about how not only have you and I both been influenced by the game and the culture, I suppose, and those we play with in terms of how we take that to the table, but then also in terms of us as humans. I know, D&D now is a big part of my personality and me, and obviously the podcast takes up a huge amount of my time, and it's something I'm very proud of. And just to go from, would this be a cool thing to try one afternoon? Yeah, to now, like, I've got a poster and a t-shirt, and I talk to hundreds of people around the world about it all the time. Is amazing. And fantastic people such as yourself that otherwise I wouldn't have had those connections with. Is super stoked. It's been such a huge, great influence on my life, and obviously for yourself as well, as we heard about in the last show, how great it's been for you and your family.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think I can add anything more of value to that. That's absolutely right. Of all things said and done, yes, it is a positive influence all around for myself, my friends, my family. When you find something that becomes a little bit of you or a lot of you, and other people add to that and they enjoy it, they have similar influences, and they come and you do build that little subculture, that little family, that little extra, those bonds internally and externally from the table. It's good. I mean, I don't want to butcher a beautiful ending. I would love to come on and talk more with you, Danilo. It's good. It's really I haven't done it in a long time. I needed it, when they say the little bits, and they say, "Oh, what's something that you could talk about for like 3 hours straight with no breaks?"
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. I definitely could. I could.
I do so.
I do. Yeah. Well, mate,
Awesome.
it's been an absolute pleasure.
It absolutely has. Is there anything you want to, talk about, promote, the drive, action towards, call to action?
Me personally, no. I don't have anything. I don't have any D&D stuff. I don't do any. Just be good.
Be excellent to each other,
Be excellent.
as wise men have said in the past.
They have.
Awesome. Well, it has absolutely been a blast, and absolutely we'll have you back on for more influence, where we'll focus on more on the more literal
conversation
definition.
Is not over.
The ominous.
I love
awesome.
It.
Well, all that's left to say is thank you so much, Mikey.
No, thank you, Danilo. Appreciate you big time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you all for you all listening at home, both my quiet listeners and my more vocal guys. Thank you everyone for listening.
And you. Don't forget
you especially. And up in the back and up at the top there, up in the nosebleeds. As usual, all the usual stuff, like, comment, subscribe, X, I'm hesitant enough to say.
Oh yeah, that's a thing, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Instagram, YouTube, obviously, videos available on Spotify and YouTube if you want to see our beautiful faces as well as listen to our beautiful voices. Otherwise, thank you all for listening and good night.
Bye.
Now it's time for the Patreon shout-outs. Huge thank you to all my patrons, starting with Josh, Lewanika and Glenn, the 3 fabulous hosts of Tabletop Journeys who've been on the show several times before and who I'll always invite back. So go check out Tabletop Journeys at ttjourneys.com or at ttjourneys on Twitter. We also have Joe from the Fourth Leg podcast all about giving DMs another leg to stand on. Again, previous guests of the show, and I'd thoroughly encourage you to go and check out their great content. So you can find them at the Fourth Leg on Twitter. We have a good friend of the show, Optional Rule. You can go and find him out on optionalrule.com or at Optional Rule, full of very insightful and educated comments and thoughts and threads on the really nitty gritty of D&D. We have what a guy, Matthew Perkins, who is just out there in the world trying to make you laugh. So go and check him out at matthewperkins.net or at Hey It's Matty P, Mattyp, and good friend of the show and one of my table mates, Matthew Street. Go and check out his partner's hustle at virtualtimehustle.com or at mpstreet88 on Twitter.